Are we ready? All right, well, let's dive in. Good morning, happy April 15th. Many of you we know. For those that we don't know, I'm Jim Marshall, this is Clint Babcock, and we're coming to you live and in color, 6 feet separated at Sandler Training in Tampa. And we've been doing these webinars now for, I guess, the last 3 or 4 weeks, every Wednesday. And the concept and the idea is, it's simply our attempt to give back. If you have an opportunity to expand your skill set, to learn a little bit, to share best practices, this is a good forum to do it. We don't pretend to have all the answers, but we got a lot of questions, just like you. And our purpose in getting together is to share some of those best practices with you. So as we go through this, don't be afraid to dive in and participate. There's a couple of ways you can do that. You can do it in the chat box. Just send it in.
Not.
Is that a question already? No.
Hold on a second.
You can do it in the chat box. Type your question there. Catherine will transcribe it and give it to us. If you want to just pipe up and share with us some ideas and best practices, you can take yourself off mute and do it that way. But don't be shy. Ask questions. This is kind of, those of you that spend any time with us at all, you know, occasionally we do a work session, which is troubleshooting, problem solving, idea sharing. That's what this is. So this is not typical webinar present death by PowerPoint kind of a thing. So this is going to be very interactive, very give and take. So don't be shy about asking questions. We've done several of these so far. We've talked about surviving and thriving in the new reality, in the new normal, as it were. We still have no idea what that is, other than the fact that we all got 90-day extensions to file our tax returns, so that's good. We talked a lot, we've been spending a lot of time on behaviors, attitudes, and techniques. What are you doing now? What have you been doing? And is this, in fact, an opportunity to adjust your approach? Whether it's behaviorally, activity-wise, whether it's what's going on between your ears from an attitude standpoint. I also think this is a good time to focus on your technique, because you really need to adjust that, and you need to kind of pay closer attention to your messaging, whether that's on social media, whether it's LinkedIn or Facebook, whether it's phone calls, whether it's emails. I think you really need to pay attention to your messaging in this day and age, simply because tensions are risen, sensitivities are more prevalent. You got to be aware of that stuff. So we'll get into some of that stuff today. And we also talked a little bit about leadership strategies. We spent some time, a couple weeks, talking about that, also specifically as it relates to your playbook. I'd be very curious if any of you that have been on past calls had a chance to look at your playbook. Maybe either you had one and you're fine-tuning it, or maybe you decided to build one. So we'd be happy to have conversations with you either in this forum or offline to talk to us about the progress that you made in that regard. So today we're talking about tactics and techniques for breaking through your sales barriers. What are some of the things you're hearing from your clients and customers and prospects? And how do we address those, knowing that we got to be on our game, sharper, better than we ever have been? So the rhetorical question is, as a seller, what's one thing you're struggling with right now as a seller? Now, let's take a couple of issues right up front. And we know that one of the things that many of us are struggling with are getting through to prospects and potential customers. We'll address that. But I want you to think about some of the questions you might have in this area, the things that you're struggling with as a seller, as a business development professional. So let's start here. Where does your revenue come from?
All right. So to tee this up and get your head wrapped around this, over the last session, we really focused in on playbooks, right? And when you really dive into a playbook, you've got a playbook that is wrapped around what most of you know, if you're not familiar with, but most of you probably are, is our CARE model, our keep, attain, recapture, and expand model. So Jim and I wanted to tee this up to get you thinking about these two different areas, because when you think about hunting for business, here are the two areas, right, that you've got to hunt, right? So think about what are the biggest issues, challenges you're running into to try to attain, to try to get more opportunities into the pipeline. And what are you doing with that? And what are you running into? I can tell you that already some of the things that I'm hearing is, you know, it's a little bit different, but when I do get a hold of somebody, we are having much longer conversations. People are spending the time, and because they're home. Quite frankly, another thing I'm hearing is people are more productive because of the commute times are lower. There's not the interruptions that are happening during the daytime as much, and there's a lot more engagement. They're willing to engage more. But then you also got to look back and go, okay, who are you competing against? Who did you compete against? What opportunities are left from a recapture standpoint? Recapture, a lot of times we look at it and go, who was a client that went away from us? What I want you to also put into this category right now is, what are some opportunities that you lost or did not come together, or maybe they decided to do nothing over the past 12 to 24 months and reach out to those individuals. One of my clients is a manufacturing client, and they compete a lot against some other manufacturers that have cheaper products that come out of China. What we've done with them is we said, hey, they're pulling every single proposal that they've done over the past 24 months to go back after those opportunities and see how many of those really did move forward, and did they buy something out of China, or did they just not do anything, and now it's an opportunity to get back in front of them. So from that standpoint, attainment. Here's your area from current accounts. So we want you to be thinking about what are some of the issues, challenges you're having with your current accounts, expansion opportunities, how are you approaching that, and then your keep. These are your accounts that do some business, but maybe not quite as much. So for those of you that don't recall, here is really the definition of each of those categories, just to get you prepped up and get your mind thinking about, all right, you got the prospecting side, and then you've got the sales cycle side. Any kind of questions that you have around that, those are probably our top areas that we're going to dive into. So with that, let's talk about what's our first question that we're going to deal with.
Right off the bat, Kelly Fairchild, if you're on the line, you texted in or you messaged in a question that says, we are missing face-to-face cold calling meetings. If you're online and you care to clarify that question, would you mind elaborating on that at all?
Yeah, because she also said more. She said we are struggling with decision makers that seem to be frozen with uncertainty. So maybe she can join in.
So
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So we're in the uniform business, facility services, and facility services on our end. Gojo's our major player, and they're unable to provide product. We're sourcing through other vendors right now. So that leaves us to really focus on our uniform sales. And that includes, healthcare, uniform, everything from a scrub to what the mechanic wears and everything in between. Our sales force prospects two ways. We do it by phone and we do it in person. And they both supplement each other. It's not one or the other. And right now, without the face-to-face contact, we're struggling with making the more personal connection of the value of our product. And so we're playing with verbiage. We're trying to be empathetic. We're trying to find information in the state and counties that can help small businesses. But we're just overall as a sales force just missing that connection that we had with not only with the field, but with our prospect. And it's almost like we're going through the stages of grief, quite honestly.
So Kelly, the typical kinds of customers that you work with are what? Give some examples of the types of businesses that are pretty common for you.
Well, our top SIC codes for Florida are hospitality, so hotels and restaurants. The second in Florida is automotive, repair or new. And then the third is AC and plumbing. So those are the meat and potatoes. Healthcare falls probably to like 10th or 11th for us in general. And so I'm actually doing a class next week with my region on it. But that's a more technical sale. It's almost, I'm not going to say it's an easier sale, but I think it's an easier transition for us right now of really beefing up our knowledge and making taking the time it takes to make that type of sale. It's usually a longer sales cycle.
So my first question would be, not just for Kelly, but for anybody, is if you put yourself in the shoes of your prospects, I think one of the first questions you have to ask yourself is, why would a prospect want to take your call or respond to your email in the first place? What would be the compelling reason for them to want to have a conversation with you? Some people might call that a value proposition. But if you stop and think about it in your particular line of work, let's take automobile dealers and repair shops. I think those are still classified as vital services, if I'm not mistaken. I think they are.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So why would a uniform service be a critical function service provider for an automobile repair shop or an auto dealer? Well, they have to stay clean, right?
Mm-hmm. Hygienically.
Change every single day.
Mm-hmm.
Who's doing that now? Or are the people in their facilities just throwing them in the laundry and putting them back on the next day, or maybe even not even doing that?
Yeah.
So one of the big concerns they're going to have is obviously cleanliness, staying compliant. So I think the first thing you have to do is talk about your messaging. Why would they want to talk to you in the first place?
Yeah, and we have done that. What I'm finding is, and that's the second part of the question, was the decision makers really seem to be petrified to make a decision. And we're really talking about, as we come out of this, everything's going to be a little bit different, right? Nothing's going back to the way it was. I think we all realize now that things have changed.
Right.
So we're working on plans of, how do you do business in the future? You have to protect your employees and you have to protect your patrons, your customers. So we've been working on that type of messaging, but I feel like it just takes a little bit more time and I need to be more patient, but excuse me, our decision makers seem to be a little frozen with fear right now on what the direction is they should go.
So Kelly, real quick question, and then I'll give you another idea here. Have over the last 3-4 weeks, have any of your sales reps had a success in closing a new deal or getting a sales cycle moving along kind of like normal? Have they had any success whatsoever?
Yes, we have.
Okay, have you captured those as third-party stories that now become part of that messaging that your other reps are using?
Yes, but not as successfully as I would like. I think I could certainly do a better job of that.
All right, so guys, for everybody, you get one inkling of success right now in this environment. You got to really capture that as a great story, and that's going to be part of your deliverable moving forward. Of, hey, look, we're talking to other clients very similar to yours. Here's what we're hearing. Here's what they're experiencing. Here's what they've decided to do and move forward. Because now all of a sudden people realize, wow, well, maybe I'm stuck. But wait a second, somebody else is moving forward with this. Somebody else is doing that. I think that's really going to help them to be able to move somebody past that. Well, hey, the way things are right now, we're just going to sit tight, right? And that's what you're hearing. Say, well, hey, you could sit tight, sure, but something, we're talking to other companies, and here's one of the things that we're starting to hear from them. They're starting to say, look, if they just sit tight right now, then there's going to be a rush 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 months from now. And now all of a sudden there's going to be this increased demand and you're not going to be able to get this, get this project in place maybe in the time that you want.
Yeah, I think it's, this is Phil. I think the other thing you might want to do is ask for referral. You know of anybody else who might benefit at this time from our service? Because if it's an automotive, they might have another automotive dealer they have a relationship with that they might refer you over to.
So this, I think that Kelly's question kind of dovetails into several others that we've already received offline, and several of you are probably wrestling with this concept, or this, sometimes clinically we refer to this as head trash. I feel guilty reaching out to prospects. I might want to come across as taking advantage of the circumstances. In other words, I don't want to come across as being too salesy. So my head trash is, or my self-limiting beliefs are, I don't want to be that person. So how do you do that? How do you get over the head trash of being reluctant to pick up the phone and make those calls or send out that email or send out that text? How do you do that without coming across sounding like you're taking advantage of the circumstances? Clint, what do you think of that?
Well, it's, so, and actually, I don't know if you noticed, Phil had a great question. Phil said, hey, everyone is getting emails that start with an empathetic opening statement. And his question was, do you feel that those are still valid and still believable? I think they are, yes. But I think right now, stories are really what has to be in that body of that email and that message in order to get somebody to move forward with some kind of an action. And quite frankly, that action is simply to read your email. So any opening line, any opener, some of the best openers are one-word openers followed by a question. Or, hey, are you guys still doing business? Question mark. Something that makes them look at the body of your email. Here's what you can't do if you're sending emails out. You can't expect a response. Maybe you'll get one, but you can't. At the end of any email you send, the best practice is to say, hey, look for my call today at 3 o'clock so that we can talk about this a little further. Your email is nothing more than a touch from an introduction to then make a call and make a touch point. Because right now, it's still the valid part of 8 to 12 touches before they really know you exist and you get into some kind of connection. It's still there, but we got to use email, we got to use LinkedIn, and phone and telephone is still going to work. So
I can add to that. We've been doing vertical marketing email campaigns, and across the country, we just sent out 15,000 to the healthcare industry. Of the 15,000, we got 25% read rate of our emails, just to give you some statistics, out of 15,000. So
that was a read rate?
Read rate, where they clicked it, read it, and then read through the whole email.
Okay.
So we felt okay with that.
Yeah, messaging is critical. Messaging is critical. One of our clients sent out emails earlier this week to 55 of his prospects and customers, and the messaging was critical. It simply said, just making you aware that we're still here. We hope that you and your family and your coworkers are doing well. We're still here if you ever need us for anything, whether it's this, this, or this. Out of 55 emails he sent out to just one individual, 55, he got 23 responses. Thanks for reaching out. 6 of those 23 said, I'm glad you reached out to us. We do have a project I might need your help on. But it was all about the messaging, not coming across salesy, not coming across pitchy with a P. Think about how you're communicating.
And for those of you that know negative reverse selling or strip lining, this is so key. In your first message, first kind of sentence or two has to be, hey, it might not make sense that we have a conversation here in the near future. However, those little pullbacks, those little parts kind of pull out a little bit of the truth and help you to sound a little, a lot less salesy because hey, it truly, that might be the case. It might not make sense that you talk right now. So when you look at that and you write the messaging out, take a look and go, all right, do I have enough little strip lines in there in order to see that it shows that I'm not, not coming at and barking at them, and instead taking that approach that's going to be more of a, hey, let's figure this out together.
So here's another example. Another one of our clients happens to be in the IT space, and their sales staff typically reaches out to their customer base, which consists of small businesses, SMBs, also big in the educational field. And typically their point of contact is the IT manager or the director of technology. Nobody's going to want to buy any of that stuff these days because they're just trying to make sure their systems are up and running. So their messaging is, hey, I'm contacting you to make sure your systems are still up and running. We've got a security patch if you want to make sure that all your systems are safe and secure to reduce hacking. Started in a conversation with this one particular IT director, and the guy says, nope, we're good, everything's fine. And the rep says, hey, just by the way, in case you're thinking of ever updating your servers or any of your equipment, now's not a bad time to think about that. Number one, because supplies are plentiful, there's a lot available, And number two, you're never going to see cheaper price than you see right now because of the oversupply. And the guy says, you know what? Spec out a server for me with the accompanying software. Totally was not on his shopping list, just came from a conversation. So that's why I say your messaging is absolutely critical. You got another one?
Yeah, well, staying on the, I think we're kind of on this prospecting theme, so let's stay on that. Mike Hubbard wrote in, hey, on a prospecting calls, they said that they know they need to do something, but they're underwater and don't want to look at how things are going to be in a couple months. All right, and maybe we can click over here. So, Mike, I know you remember Let's Pretend, right? So here's what I want you to be thinking about. Let's Pretend is an awesome questioning technique that we have that allows you to bring the future to the present. Okay, so here's where, if you get stuck right now, you've got a couple options, right? Option one, you could say, well, hey, let's pretend we were talking in July, August, as it relates to X, Y, and Z. Would that make sense that, you know, let's explore that right now. So you're going out to where they think they may want to actually have this discussion and this conversation, and then you're bringing it back to what's going on now, and that's where you can find pain. You can drive into that aspect. Now the other one, Jim hit the click. For some of my other clients, it made more sense for them to go back in the past. So hey, let's pretend we were talking, or this one is, let's pretend we were talking in January. You may want to say, hey, let's pretend we're talking in July and August. Either way, whichever way fits for you, it helps to get things unstuck by that paralyzation that they're having right now, and you put it out there or you take it back to where you want to be. Because what do we got to do? If you think about going into that sales process, we got to find pain. And if you remember, the second level of pain is impact. That's where urgency starts to happen. We've got to be able to get there. If we can't get there, then, hey, they're more than willing to put it off because we don't have the quantification of the impact of that pain of moving faster and moving a little bit quicker than what they seem to want. Because quite frankly, they're looking at the prioritization of where they're going to spend cash, where they're going to spend their capital, and we got to move that up by having them realize that now is a good time to handle these kind of situations because of this amount of pain that you're having. Okay, so Mike, I'm not sure if you're on still, if you can unmute. Does that help you to kind of deal with that when they say, hey, look, we just want to, you know, we just not sure we want to do anything?
Yeah, because I think, you know, I've talked to one person here recently, and it was a one-person communication team, and of course they're underwater, and that's where it came from to say, hey, I know I need to do something because, you know, so many companies have gotten caught with their pants down basically right now.
Yeah.
And they just said, hey, I'd love to talk to you, but do in 2 months. And I see that's where it could be a good thing to say, hey, let's pretend I do call you back in 2 months. What are some of the things that you're experiencing now that you would want to talk about then? And maybe I could, you know, segue into having that conversation now, especially because right now so many companies can utilize our offerings right now to help them get from underwater.
Hey, Mike, were you on last week with Playbooks with us or no?
No, unfortunately, I wasn't able to be here last week.
All right, so I'm going to give you 62 seconds to tell everybody what you do, because last week we did Playbooks, and one of the questions that we ended up not being able to get to was, hey, if we decided to develop a digital playbook and we did videos of role plays and videos of some of our best practices, where do we go about what kind of tools do we have, or what could we use, and then where would we house those assets and that content? So you got 62 seconds to tell people what you do.
Yeah, basically that's a perfect segue. Right now, so many companies are frustrated because people are so spread out and they can't communicate well with them. They can't do learning as well. And also they're doing so many video calls. They're capturing so much video and content right now. And that's what Arena Edge does. You're able to take your video from video conferences like this or just off your camera, turn it into an on-demand library, but then actually add to it. Take your video, add slides, add hotspots, add extra video, polling questions, assessment questions. So you can take all this content you're creating and get it spread out and sent out to your people. We're also in beta testing right now for our own video conferencing, so we'll be able to do calls like this too. So not only capture it live, have on demand. And you can also, it's like having your own Dropbox where you can have all your documents in one spot too.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. I just figured it might be helpful for some people to know. You can private chat to Mike if you want to, take this offline a little bit further. Next question.
So what do we do about situations where you are able to get a hold of people, but some of the things we're hearing about or some of the responses that we're getting, there's probably more than one or two of us on the call today that might get some of these responses. I have no money right now. I'm too busy to talk. The building is closed. We've had layoffs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Other than that, good luck. But how do you respond to some of those kinds of things? Not so much in the words you use, but in the technique in terms of how you say those things. Not necessarily what you say, but how you say them.
You mean empathetic wise and
Empathetic wise, using softening statements,
yeah,
for example.
Yeah, and this is the core of those of you that understand negative reverse selling is being able to float and go wherever they're going, right? So if they say those kind of things, we got to go with them. If they say, hey, we don't have any money, we just don't have any money right now. Well, then the response is, well, of course, nobody does. Hey, absolutely. And then you got to come back with your question of, well, hey, let's not even talk about money right now, because quite frankly, it's not even that important. Right now, what we got to do is we got to look at and figure out, hey, when you do have funds and dollars and cents, what are some of the things you want to be able to accomplish as it relates to now you insert your product and services. You can keep the conversation going, because if you don't know how to handle that, you're going to get stuck with, okay, well, something, why don't I just follow up with you in the third quarter? And they go, okay, yeah, that'd be great. And now you're done. You've got no place to go. So you gotta make sure that no matter where they are moving, you're okay with moving forward with them. Hey, look, nobody's going to make a decision on this right now. Well, of course they're not. Hey, I can't imagine they would. They probably got enough things to try to keep the business afloat and such. But hey, let's pretend we were talking about this in 2 or 3 months from now. What would be the top 2 or 3 challenges or issues that that you would want to make sure that we would handle as it relates to this? Keep the process moving, because if we get stuck on an objection, it's just an opinion. You got to look at objections or opinions, and we got to have a way to be able to move through that. So, Jim, let me throw this one at you, because it came from our good friend Ryland.
Okay.
Okay. Ryland says, how do you kickstart a deal after the decision maker gave an approval date and they missed that date?
Okay, so the buyer said we're going to make a decision by X. They missed that date simply because of everything else going on.
Yep.
Now, are we assuming that we're able to get a hold of that decision
Yeah,
maker?
let's say the person said, oh yeah, we're going to make a decision by March 31st, and here we are mid-April, and they haven't made a decision yet.
I think what we got to do is, first of all, as Clint alluded to earlier, we got to be empathetic. I understand things happen, probably not the top thing on your priority list at the current time. Where do you think the project will be when things do get back to normal, and when do you think we should reconvene to figure out whether or not we can move this project ahead? So what I did was I missed my clear future in my post-sale step, perhaps. In other words, they agreed to do business. Maybe I didn't post-sell it enough in terms of what's going to happen next. It's still an opportunity for me to go back and post-sell it for the next event, for future actions. So we know that when we're trying to close a deal, possible outcomes can be a yes, they can be a no, or it can be a clear future. We might not have had a clear future here due to nobody's fault other than extenuating circumstances. If I do have an opportunity to get in front of them again or have a conversation, I got to be empathetic. What do you suppose is going to happen next, and when should we talk about that again?
Okay.
Hey, Ron, I know you can do it, but raise your hand right now. If I've called on you, you could tell me the 7 steps of the Sandler sales process. Boom, boom, boom. You got all 7 right now. Yeah, not too many hands going up. Maybe a hand, maybe 1 or 2. You could tell me, oh, binding report, upfront contract, pain, budget
Decision.
Decision, right? So Ryland, here's the thing also. one of our core Sandler rules is wherever you find yourself getting stuck, you got to go back to the left, back in the sales process. So Ryan, if you got stuck here, you got to, and I can't tell you where to go back. Maybe you got to go back to budget because maybe that's changed. Maybe you got to go back to pain, but you can't try to move forward and push things forward. You got to go, all right, I got stuck here. I gave them a proposal. They said they make a decision by the hair. Now I got to go back probably to pain to find out, hey, is this still relevant pain, to try to be able to get back and bring that urgency back top of mind.
Okay, that makes sense.
All right. And then last thing, did you have quantification of the pain if they did not hit the date that they told you?
It was a date that they gave to me that they would make the decision, because I had asked, if you did agree to move forward, when would you want to move forward? They said it would be March 31st. I said, okay, no problem. I didn't follow up and go, if for some reason you don't sign on March 31st. I didn't say that because I didn't ask for a date. They gave me the date off the cuff, just kind of letting them, because they said we were going to move forward. I said, okay, great. When would you like to move forward? They said this date. And I kept proceeding forward with their own data. I didn't want to, push back or anything, like, okay, it sounds great. Because there was 5 people in the room and they all agreed to the same date. Everything was fine.
All right. So Rylan, you may have heard this once before. And team, everybody, you got to be thinking of this. The date they're going to make a decision, that's almost irrelevant as much as related to when do they want this project up and running and installed. So we call it the when, why, and what if talk track. When, why, and what if talk track will help you have the most solid pipeline ever. If you're a manager sitting here going, yeah, my team hits their pipeline, sometimes they don't, sometimes they do. Here's the #1 talk track you got to have down as it relates to making sure you understand if something's going to come through or not. Hey, when you're looking to have this up and running and installed and you got it, and then whatever date they gave you, then why by then, and then what if that doesn't get hit? What happened? So that's a great little talk track there to tactically find out is something really, really real. And if you get wishy-washy answers through that, then your date is probably going to be pretty wishy-washy.
Okay.
So Clint, here's a question that came in.
Yeah.
When people are prospecting for business, even under normal circumstances, that can be a pretty daunting task. People generally have 2 fears when it comes to prospecting for business, cold calling, whatever you want to call it. Fear number 1 is actually picking up the phone and making those calls. Fear number 2 is, oh my God, what do I say if somebody answers? So how do we adjust our messaging in the current environment? Maybe you want to speak to this. How do we adjust our messaging as it relates to starting a conversation with a prospect, and what do I say? How do I adjust my 30-second commercial? What do I do?
Yeah. All right. So here's the structure we've been working on with a lot of our clients, and I'll do my best since I don't have the other thing. Talk about the business, talk about them, and then about your company or about what you want to discuss. And this is where your new pain indicators are going to come into play. So your opening line, hey, this is Clint Babcock. My company's Sandler Training, but hey, before we get into that, hey, I'm just curious. Your company overall, over the last 2, 3, 4 months, what have you guys been going through? What's been happening there at your company as it relates to getting everybody remotely? I'm going to try to engage from a business perspective and not try to drive down into a 30-second commercial around my products and features and functionalities and pains and issues and indicators. Because I want to get into that conversation of what's been going on, what's been happening at their company. Then I can shift it to them. Hey, have you had to go from working 100% at the office to remote? How's that worked out? Okay. Then I can roll into, hey, look, what we're hearing from a lot of companies right now as it relates to now from Jim and our standpoint, what are our pain indicators are that, hey, everybody's had to go virtual, and it's a different kind of environment for them to prospect. And for some of them, it's pretty easy. For others, they're struggling on how to be able to really get a hold of the people that they're trying to reach. And then how do they move that sales process along, knowing that they've usually been very comfortable getting in front of people? Hey, help me out. How have you guys been able to deal with that? So you got to shift your pain indicators into what's relevant today. And that's what we talked about playbooks last time, about your playbook that you had prior to a month ago was great. That playbook, the structure needs to be the same, but the pain indicators of the deliverable have to change.
And it goes back to what we talked about before. You really have to put yourself in the shoes of your prospect. Why would they want to have a conversation with you? Are you able to articulate the pains or the circumstances that they might currently be experiencing? If you can get that, they're going to be compelled to want to have a conversation with you.
Well, and don't forget pre-call planning. If
Oh, yeah.
if you're familiar with an industry or what have you, and what's happening in that industry, as opposed to just blowing and going through 70, 80 calls a day, if you've got some understanding through that industry, you have a nicer opening with that. Hey, look, I do a lot of work in your industry. Some of the things that I'm hearing is this, this, and this. I'm just curious, how have you guys been handling this from your business perspective? It gives you that softer opening and shows some credibility because you know what's happening out there in their marketplace.
So one of the questions we got, Clint, from one of our participants is, are people going to be able to receive the slide deck that we're going through now?
Oh, hell no.
Well, you could, but we'll go one better for you. If you want to talk about any of this stuff offline and have a conversation about your particular business, your particular situation, your particular company, your particular targets, that's where we invite you to pick up the phone and call us or reach out to us via email. We're happy to walk you through these individually in a one-on-one fashion.
Yeah.
So once we have this conversation, once we engage a prospect in a conversation, where do we take it then?
Well, so when this is the part where it's interesting, because if you were to take it into pain before, you take it into pain now, but it just may be different, right? So this is around building that kind of rapport. Your rapport is going to be built with the conversation. Now, keep in mind, one of our best rapport builders ever are asking questions. So we're always in tune to the questions that we're going to ask. And hey, Phil, I want you to take yourself off mute because this is going to dive into one of Phil's questions. Phil made a statement. He said, connection questions are an important part of your opening conversation with a prospect. He said, are connection questions part of the upfront contract? If not, can you give an example of how you transition to connection questions after you review your upfront contract? Phil, you got us off mute. Can you give a little bit of life to that, and then I'll do my best to answer it for you?
Yeah. You know, I think the difficulty has been with some of our sales team members is connecting with people properly, right? When they initially talk to them, you know, they want to get into some of the salesy stuff, you know, the upfront contract, what you want to do, but they're not connecting properly in their approach to doing that. So I guess my question was kind of, you know, how do you separate the two? Do you separate the two? Or what's the transition from a connection to an upfront contract?
Phil, I'm going to test you real quick. Do you remember the 5 elements of an upfront contract?
Yeah. You asked me to rip the bite off, just like you.
I'm convinced. Is everybody else? Purpose, right? Purpose of the call, right? Time.
Correct.
Your agenda, their agenda, and outcome.
Right.
Okay? Here's where this goes. When I get the chance in my upfront contract to say my agenda, keep in mind, when I teach this, I put a question mark behind every one of those elements, which helps to make everybody understand that those are questions along the way. So those of you that aren't familiar with an upfront contract, it's how we open up the expectations of a sales call and how we frame up how we're going to spend our time together. So Phil, to answer your question, that connection question, as I lay out my agenda, I am really looking for their permission to ask them questions. So I'm going to lay out, hey, you okay if I ask you some questions about how your organization has been able to transition over the last 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, and what you see coming back from a when people are coming back to the office, and this would fit in your world, how you see security being an important part of that. And if you could go back 6 months, what would you have changed, or what would you do from a security standpoint that you wish you had in play now? So are you okay if I ask you some questions along those lines?
So are you looking, so my question, I guess, would then transition to, we're trying to get more virtual meetings with clients, or try to, instead of just the call, see if we can get a face-to-face to bring a little bit more personality into that type of call. Is there a way of doing that? Is there a technique of trying to say, hey, would it be better if we just got onto a Teams meeting or whatever, a go-to meeting, and where we could see each other and just talk?
So if I were to put this in that, so Phil, let me make sure I understand this right. I make an outgoing call, I get into a conversation with somebody for 5, 10, 15 minutes, and then I want to transition the next call into a Zoom or a Teams meeting.
Right, or you might want to, after 5 minutes, just say, hey, would it be better maybe if we set up a Teams meeting or face-to-face? Would that be more personable for you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's the direction almost everybody's going, is after you make that first initial approach, and you find just enough pain, because in the normal world, in your world a month ago, you would have transitioned, hey, how about we do this? Open up your calendar. When would be a good time for me to come out and sit down and have a conversation with you, right?
Exactly.
So same thing. Hey, after you found enough of a pain of why they want to continue to talk, that's when you make that transition to, hey, look, typically what happens now is we find some time. We probably need 30 minutes, an hour, whatever that might be. We'll come together on a video conference call, and I'll bring maybe some additional person or two. You can invite some other people, and we'll really kind of start to explore this a little bit more. And everybody's working remotely. A lot of people are doing it, and the only technical issue would be if they don't have a camera.
Right.
Other than that,
so my feeling though is, by the way, Phil's got a great looking beard, doesn't he? Isn't that a great?
Yeah, I would tell them I would shave it before we had the call.
Okay. But the point is that if you get to that point in a conversation with a prospect, you are light years ahead of everybody else. Just the fact that somebody would be willing to spend 3 or 4 or 5 minutes with you on the phone to talk about the reason for your call, God love you. God love you. I believe, though, that the real magic is getting to that point. How do you go about earning the right to have that conversation with a prospect? How do you start the call? Because here's what we know, and those of you that have been through pattern interrupt, bonding and rapport, that type of thing, you know that prospects decide usually in the first 8 to 10 seconds whether they even want to have a conversation with you. If you come across on that call or in your email looking or talking or sounding like a salesperson, you're going to get treated like a salesperson. So what is your talk track? What's your approach for the first 8 to 10 seconds of the call? Are you coming across salesy, or are you coming across genuine? I think that's where you got to earn the right to have that conversation with a prospect. And there's a number of ways we can do it just with the start of a call to get to that point. So,
hey, Bill, Bill Short, I'm going to come to you here in a second, but I want to tee this up. Bill Short is a client of ours. He owns Red Oak Land. He helps people be able to sell their vacant land, and he's been doing this for a while. And we've been talking over the past couple of weeks about how he can reach out to some people without sounding salesy. And we talked about doing a little bit of a survey, doing a little bit of a reach out in order to recapture some conversations or go back to some people that he may not have touched or talked to in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years. And how could he do that without all of a sudden looking like he's out there trying to prospect and find business? So Bill, why don't you take a moment and just share with them kind of what you've decided to do and how that's been working.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate the invite to answer that question. Where we've really, obviously, we've got buyers, we've got sellers. We've got people that would like to sell, we've got people that would like to buy. Now's not a time to really be doing either one. There's not a lot to necessarily talk about in the imminent future, the next I don't know, a lot of questions in our industry right now, what this is going to look like long term. However, it's important to understand kind of the nature of where people are sitting today. What are our prospective clients doing? What are they thinking they may do to help kind of maybe predict the future to some degree? So we put together a little bit of an informal survey just to help us understand that. And, it goes something along the lines of, well, we've got a battery of questions depending upon where that conversation may go. But really the goals of the call, the goals of the talk track is, what are they doing today? What do they think the world looks like in the future, both personally and professionally? Some of them won't always own businesses. Some of them are just landowners. And really the opening part of that conversation is, we talk with a lot of folks similar to yourself. They ask us quite a few questions about what other landowners are doing, and you can apply this to whatever user or whatever person you're talking to, but landowner in this case, what other landowners are doing. Would you mind spending maybe 5 or 10 minutes with me to talk a little bit about kind of your perspective and your outlook? And, we try to deliver that by email to kind of tee it up if we can, but sometimes that's not always a privilege, and we just take it from a cold call perspective. And we've got an amended voicemail to kind of bait them into that question as well. Really what we're trying to do is an excuse to call them, and how do we bait them into a deeper conversation than just, hey, how you doing? What's going on? Tired of looking at the kids and the dog and the cat? That's getting pretty generic in today's world with as many COVID outreaches that there are. I get 10 a day from insincere people wanting to know how I'm doing. So that's our spin on it.
No, thanks. No, I think it's a great approach. It's a great way of being able to open up things without diving right into business, but open up, hey, what are you hearing out there? And because there's a lot of thought leadership that can come out of some of the answers that you get that you can share within your industry.
And we are not getting many responses via email. We are getting opens. We are tracking our opens discreetly. We are getting opens and reads. We are getting clicks, which means they're passing it around their team but we're not getting much response. Hey, yeah, great. Call me on Thursday. We're not getting any of those, but we do bait them in and tell them, hey, we're going to call you later this week. Keep an eye out for my call. They almost always take our call. Problem is they may be walking into a pediatrician appointment. They may be getting ready to jump on another Zoom call. And those are just natural things we're going to fight against in a normal environment anyway.
So I'm curious, I have a question for the people on the call. I'm wondering how many of us actually have formulated a talk track for an approach call that you can use during these times. If you or your people actually drafted the text of a call that you would use to call prospects, or are we winging it? My belief is this. These are difficult times. We've been talking about that, no question about it. You have got to be spot on your messaging. So 3 things that I would recommend. Number 1 is draft your talk track. What is going to be your approach call using some of these tips and ideas that you have? Number 2 is to practice it. Any athletic event, any exam that you go through, you don't want to be taking your swings with a live prospect on the phone, particularly because they're so hard to get a hold of. When you do get a hold of a prospect, you want to put your best foot forward. The way you do that is knowing what you're going to say and knowing how you're going to say it. One of the things you might want to do is, if you are in an environment where you've got multiple sellers on your team, why not do them together and critique each other's calls? You can do it virtually. So the first thing is figure out what you're going to say. Second is practice how you're going to say it. The third is probably the one you're going to like the least, and that's increase the frequency of your calls. If you're doing 15 or 20 calls a day under normal circumstances, that has to be 30 or 40. Just the nature of the beast. Who's going to develop those skills? Who's going to build that muscle to come out smelling like roses on the other side?
All right, I know we got about 10 minutes left, so if there's any other questions, please put them in and we'll cover them.
Or
But
just shout out, unmute and
yeah,
shout them out.
let me give you one other thing. Now let's go to the end of the sales cycle, right? Something's there, but it's stuck. It just, that if everything would have remained the same, you, for the most part, 99%, you thought that deal was going to come through. So this is where I'd say put your creativity hat on and get into some conversations about what do you got to do to move that deal along with them. So it could be, here's what we're not advocating. We're not advocating discounts. We're not advocating you going into, hey, let's drop off 20% of this in order to push this through. No, get creative. Get creative around payment terms, right? You could do that. My friends that are on with AVI-SPL, one of the things that came up in one of our calls yesterday is one of the gentlemen said, hey, look, I know we've got a lot of screens, we've got a lot of equipment in this deal. Look, you got a couple of choices. You can wait till everybody else's demand comes up and we're going to have a demand crunch and it's going to be hard for us to get that equipment. So we might be 3 to 6 to 9 months later, or you can go ahead, do the deal now, only purchase the equipment, we'll house it, and then when you're ready to move forward with the installation project, we can move forward at that at any time. And they've been getting some really good results out of that. So get creative at the end. If you got something stuck, find out what can get that unstuck to move without diminishing your products or your services or your value that you bring as a provider.
That's excellent. That's what we've done. And the one other thing that we've done that's helped is try to offer leasing instead of an outright purchase to fit a budget.
Love it.
Our friend Bridget Bello is on the line and she says they're doing team calls. Bridget, how do you do that virtually in the context of people being in different locations? Can you give us maybe a best practice or a tip?
Sure. Well, we've done it on Zoom, but we've also I call Jason's cell phone and then I merge in another person on the call, and it's worked really well for us.
So somebody also texted in or sent us a message that they make it a point of recording their outbound calls and their voicemails, which is terrific to close that loop. How are we going about critiquing them? Do we critique them in terms of what we did well? What could we have done better, both in terms of messaging and technique, in terms of delivery? And then do we practice how to improve? It's a great practice to do, but then what do we do with it once we capture those? So just something to think about. Clint, did you, what about the solutions that you offer here? Did we cover that one? That's one you just talked about with
Yeah, that's what
your
we
friends
just,
over
that's what we just
AVI?
talked about.
All right.
Doing something, just it's that creative brainstorming around. And Phil, you mentioned yours. Absolutely, there's some things that all kind of companies can do to make things move forward. We just got to get there. Back to the recording. The one thing too that we're finding from some of the sales leaders, they're always so limited to be able to see what their sales team is doing. This is allowing a joint sales call to be able to happen so much more frequently and so much more easier, where you can pull the people together on a Zoom call instead of people running around a geographic location so much. So we're also starting to hear that for the first time, sales leaders have actually been able to be on 2 or 3 sales calls a day with their team because they got the digital opportunity and the virtual way of doing that.
So we were talking about best practices and how to go forward, things that maybe you can implement. I think part of that is also making sure your head is in the right place. And a couple of thoughts on that. Number one, understand that these are unusual times. Not many of us have done business in these types of circumstances. So number one is give yourself permission to fail. Give yourself permission to fail. You know what? You're going to screw up. You're going to try. You're going to be talking to a prospect and you might say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. You're going to learn from it. So give yourself permission to fail. Number two is understanding that there is opportunity out there. We just have to get out of our own way. There are people out there that are doing business. If you talk to certain industries and verticals, their business is absolutely going through the roof. Bridget had somebody on the call last week where their business is going gangbusters in the securities business, in the online security business. So understand that one of the things we have to do is mentally and emotionally, psychologically, get our heads in the right place. What about behaviors or techniques, Clint?
Well, last week, if you didn't make last week, we talked about playbook and we touched a little bit on cookbook. Whatever got you to where you were before probably has to change. So as it relates to your behaviors, maybe I'll tell you one thing that I'm really focusing in on right now is LinkedIn Sales Navigator. If you're not affluent on that and you haven't spent the $700-800 to get on that, that might be something. It's a gap in skill set. Crises like this really pull up our gaps. It pulls up our gaps in our skill set. So from a prospecting behavior standpoint, maybe you've got a gap as it relates to LinkedIn. Maybe you got a gap as it relates to email. Maybe you haven't done a good enough job of really cultivating those connections. And that's the part where we got to start utilizing the network that we've spent the last years and years doing. So behavior-wise, the things that got you to successful before may not be there right now. So rewire that. I can tell you this, I have sent out more LinkedIn communication over the past 2-3 weeks than I have probably in the last 6 months. Because that's my prospecting time, usually sometime between 9, 10, and 11 o'clock at night while I'm sitting there pretending like I'm watching TV with the family, but instead I'm prospecting and I'm looking for opportunities out there that are existing in my network of connections. So make it a point to really look at where's your gaps and start filling that skill set of gaps. We got 52 people on here. That's why you're on here, to pick up 1 or 2 things that are going to help you with your skill set gap. Behavior-wise, that's the role play and the practice that Jim was talking about.
So behavior, number 1, do the activities, do the behaviors, increase the frequency of your calls. If it took you 10 calls to get a hold of one prospect, make it 20 or 30 or 40 calls. We've got the time to do it, let's do it. Attitude, make sure your head is in the right place. Make sure that emotionally, psychologically, you understand it's difficult times. Adjust your approach. Technique, practice your messaging, practice with others in the office. Be aware of and pay attention to things like tonality, verbiage, pacing. That is magnified on the phone. So to wrap up, because we're almost against the clock here, we'll invite you to do a couple of things. If you want to call us and share with us your takeaways, the things you're going to implement, it could be, how do I do this or how do I do that? Clint's available, I'm available. We're happy to spend time with you offline and answer some specific questions you have. We don't have any problem doing that. Some of you have taken the time to access some of the resources that we have here. Our Sell online portal that has samples of some of the stuff that we're talking about. It's got white papers, it has approaches, it has audio, it has video. You're welcome to access that. In the meantime, figure out what you're going to do going forward. What is it you're going to implement from this day forward? Try it, because in fact, the conversation I had yesterday, the gentleman said, nothing's happening, nobody's calling. And I said, you really expect prospects to be calling you with purchase orders and checkbooks? He goes, yeah, I guess I better make something happen. So that's my message. Make something happen. Anything else, Clint?
Nope, that's it.
That's it.
We're a wrap. Hey, thank you all for joining us.
Have a great week. Next week, we're going to